That's
Bad role.
I don't. So $3
$2.95.
right? $3 next year.
Same year.
So I don't want to see. You don't know. It's worse to have to go up.
I would
So, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to start in a couple of minutes. So, if you can, please start heading to your seats.
Mine is on we put it never file.
It's not.
The other thing, yours that page yet?
Yeah, thank goodness, I'm not ready to be a grandma.
Yes.
I know that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you're a must.
Well, your son's like. No, change perspective. With particular.
Oh, that was.
No, that's
They're
why
in
you.
the bag.
Well, you did what you said. It's been astonishing. Really. And
We have it tomorrow, whenever you think.
this is not fun. No. We're going.
And good afternoon to everyone. My name is Ruben Collins. I'm president of the Charles County Board of Commissioners and chair of COG. I'd like to thank the National Association of Counties for providing this venue for us today. And today's meeting will begin with the Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
As a reminder to everyone, this meeting is being live streamed and is open to the general public. Today's chair report is really recognition of new members of COG. I'd like to acknowledge Natalie Faney Gonzalez from Montgomery County. And also the chair of the Prince George's County Council, Crystal Orianta. At this time, I'd like to turn the meeting over to Mr. Mercer to give his executive director's report.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and thank you all for being here today. So we've got a great agenda for today, and two topics I think hopefully will solicit a lot of conversation from the board. We're going to be talking about the Potomac Interceptor and next steps for that important piece of infrastructure in the region. And then when we have completed 2 of 3 region-wide gatherings on data centers. And I've asked our staff who have done a great job on both of those issues to make sure that they leave plenty of time to engage each of you in conversation. And this is not a one and done, obviously, on either one of those topics. Want to take this opportunity to introduce, we have a number of our staff here today that always support us and do a great job at our monthly meetings, but we have 2 faces that you may not know, 2 new members of our senior team. Susan Ways has been on several months now as our new Human Resources Director. And so everyone give a big welcome to Susan. And probably dive more into this at the summer retreat, but Susan has been updating and revamping a number of our processes in the HR department. And so has been doing incredible work. And Susan, welcome. Sakina Khan. Sakina, say hello. At COG. She comes to us from the District of Columbia, so sorry about that. 20 years as a deputy director of planning, MIT graduate school background, just about every big project you can think of in the district for the last many years. Sakina has had her fingerprints on, and she's taken on the revamped title of Department of Economic and Community Planning Services. So Paul Desjardins had that role for over 40 years. So Sakina has big shoes to fill. I will tell you, has hit the ground running, and one of the priority projects that we have discussed, the board has discussed, is pulling together a region-wide comprehensive economic development strategy, otherwise known as a CEDS, and that is a project that is run through the Department of Commerce. We had our kickoff meeting yesterday with Department of Commerce leadership, and Sakina will be running that, so much more to come on that, but she will be engaging with each of you and your Chamber of Commerce and your local community groups over the next year to put that CEDS together. That CEDS is a requirement for the region to be designated as an economic development district.
Right.
Can unlock a lot of federal assistance and will kind of create the region-wide table for the public and private sector to come together to talk about big regional issues, where right now that table really does not exist. You have a flyer in front of you for Bike to Work Day, which is May 15th. It is our 25th anniversary. So here's the ask, and Dan runs Bike to Work Day for us. We are encouraging, there's over 100 stops in the region, so there's one, I'm sure, in your neighborhood. But if you could show of hands now who may be willing to participate in at least going to one of the stops and saying hello. Okay, so if your hand, okay, that's doable, right? That's good. So Dan is going to jot down names, follow up, find what stop is in your community that's most convenient to get to, and obviously make sure you're armed with all the information. So for Bike to Work Day, you see that flyer. We have a lot of partners throughout the region that partner with us on Bike to Work Day.
Ready on my way to work.
The last piece, and I'm going to hand it off to Monica to give a legislative update, is we've got the most recent episode of Collaboration in Action out, which discusses talent capital.ai, which was a region-wide launch of a job resource for anyone in the region, but particularly geared towards federal workers and contractors. We have over 100,000 folks who have used the site, 80,000 very extensively. We've got a really great breakdown that the Secretaries of Labor in Virginia, Maryland, and DC have found very useful. Who's looking for work? What industries are they looking in? There's a lot of back-end data that is collected that is very helpful to the workforce board. So that focus on talent capital, also on Loudoun Learners, which is a first of its kind in this region, funded by the Loudoun County government and their Department of Information Technology. It's a 12 to 18 month course that 7 folks from Loudoun County are going through, getting intensive training in the IT department and doing work that Loudoun County would be paying for anyway, but also getting the skills in the process to be employed either by Loudoun County or in the county. And it's been very successful. And Scott Boggs has been a big leader in this, working with Steve Cooper, who's on site in Loudoun. And we have talked with the CAOs about this and obviously looking for interest in expanding Loudoun Learners across the region. So more to come on that, or get with your CAO on that to learn a little bit more. But that video is out now. So now I'll turn things over to Monica to go over our legislative update. I will say that the legislative work that COG is doing is growing in terms of our presence in both Richmond, the Wilson Building here in DC, and Annapolis. That legislative package that you pass, Monica has taken very ably and making sure that that's translated into encouraging different pieces of legislation to move forward. So with that, I'll hand it off to Monica.
Thank you, Clark. It's great to see everyone today. Just a few high-level updates. As you all know, both Maryland and Virginia are currently in session. Virginia is supposed to wrap up this week. The Budget Conference Committee is still, I believe, debating a number of issues, so we will see how long that takes. But we are really still trying to push on 3 issues that I wanted to highlight on the Metro funding, additional funding on both the capital and operating budgets in Virginia, kind of through our DMV moves recommendations, And another issue we are hoping to have a budget amendment funding come through on is talent capital program that Clark mentioned, continuing building out and expanding that. We're hoping to have a funding commitment in Maryland as well, and DC has already committed 200,000. So matching that from each of the states, in our opinion, is really a good regional value and will help continue to help place workers in our region. The last one is a amendment on ticket reciprocity and out-of-state vehicle registrations. It's a budget amendment in Virginia. We also have legislation on the Maryland side looking to really move along regional agreements between DC, Maryland, and Virginia to establish the ability to recoup ticket reciprocity for automated tickets and also look into the issue of out-of-state license registrations. So we're hoping to move forward with that this legislative session and get agreement from all three of the states. The Maryland side goes to mid-April, so still have about a month left. There's been some success on the Metro Funding Modification Act on the House side. It has passed the Maryland House and is now being considered by the Maryland Senate. So hopefully we will see continued movement on that and a DMV moves funding commitment on the Maryland side. And we're continuing to still push on the other two issues as well and working with our policy committees on a number of other environmental and food security issues throughout session.
Thank you, Monica. And I would just, mention on a couple of those, the Mayor Bowser hosted Governor Moore and Governor Spanberger a few weeks ago. And that was the first time that the three principals in over 4 years had sat down to talk about any of these regional issues. And we were asked to help contribute to that agenda. So things like talent capital came up, things like supporting transit came up, things like coordinating on public safety and National Guard came up, and commitments and ticket reciprocity came up. And commitments, I'm told, I wasn't sitting in the room, from all three supportive of those initiatives to work together. And I know they are gathering again tomorrow through the Greater Washington Partnership, which, and I'll be in the room for that. I think these issues are going to be revisited. So on all of them, I think that's some positive movement on some issues the region has been working on for a number of years. That concludes my report there. Thank you.
Thank you, Clark. There's one resolution on the consent agenda. If you look on page 14, you will find that. At this time, I'd like a motion to adopt Resolution R18, 2026.
So moved.
Moved and properly second. Is there any further questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. I neglected to request approval of the February 11th meeting minutes.
Second.
Moved and properly second. All in favor? Opposed? The ayes have it. So we have a rather robust agenda for today, and I want to get right to it. The board will be briefed on COG's recent work on the impacts of data centers in our region. I can tell you, as a jurisdiction that is exploring this at this very moment, it's very timely, and I really appreciate the fact that COG has taken this on as an initiative. Over the last month, COG held 2 workshops on data centers, one focused on energy impacts and one on factors related to water. A third workshop is looking at land use and will take place within the next couple of months. At this time, we will hear from Steve Bieber, COG Water Resource Program Director, Jeff King, COG's Climate, Energy, and Air Program Director, and Sakina Khan, COG's Community and Economic Services Director, on key takeaways from the meetings and next steps as we continue to learn more about this very important regional issue.
Thank you. Hello.
Probably have to turn it on.
Thank you, Chair Collins. Good afternoon, everyone. Nice to be here with you today. As you heard, my name is Jeff King. I manage the Climate, Energy, and Air Quality Program at COG. As you heard, our first data center forum was focused on the issue of energy. It was held out in Reston, Virginia. We had elected officials, agency staff, key stakeholders, members of the Data Center Coalition, our regional electric utilities like Dominion and Pepco, members of the larger PJM grid system, as well as those with some level of oversight of the grid, such as representatives from the National Electric Reliability Council. We also heard from folks developing interest to potential solutions to the challenges being faced on these issues. As hopefully you are aware, this slide shows Northern Virginia is home to the largest data center cluster in the world. That big line on the left is Virginia. Next up, Beijing, Columbus, Ohio, Oregon. So clearly we are the epicenter of this issue. And the scale of the energy demand associated with operating these data centers is quite large. Next slide. Before I get into it, I wanted to ask a few questions of the board, and you don't have to answer out loud, but just to kind of set the scale of things. So first question, what is the peak energy demand of one of our largest single electricity users in the region, WMATA or Metro, expressed in terms of megawatts? Second, hopefully everyone knows Dominion's the major electric power utility in Virginia. What's the peak demand of the entire Dominion system ever? And third, how much system capacity needs to be added to just the Dominion territory to meet the rising projected demand from data centers and other large loads in the next 5 years? Got that? So just to give you a scale, Metro has a capacity need of about 175 megawatts. They use about 1 billion kilowatt hours annually. Dominion, our largest electric power utility, its peak demand of the entire Dominion system was 25,000 megawatts, just to give you a sense of the scale. And Dominion is currently projecting over the next 5 years, they're going to need to double, literally double their capacity from 25,000 to 50,000 megawatts, which is just an immense amount. Next slide. And this is, and the reason we have some information on this is we've been collecting utility data since 2005. And this shows just the commercial electricity consumption. And you can see it's been fairly flat, except for 2 lines. And you can see that one line is Loudoun County. And we've been keenly aware of the impact that data centers are had in Loudoun County. The other one is Prince William County, not to shine a light on Chair Randall, but just to give you the sense of the scale that we're dealing with here, it's really immense. And part of the reason for this is currently there's about 200 data centers in Loudoun County. There's about 170 more. And if each data center is looking at maybe 50, 100, 200 megawatts, it's a lot of power, a lot of need, a lot of investment and capacity. Next slide. And so, as I mentioned, we need to double the capacity in Dominion by 2031. Big challenge. Next slide. And across the entire United States, we're looking at needing to get up to something close to 80 gigawatts by 2030. So just a massive amount of power that's needed nationwide. Next slide. So in terms of the forum participation, they really honed in on 3 aspects of our collective immediate near-term interest. 1, the scale of the energy demand to be met and the options available to get this done. The impact that meeting this data center energy demand could have on electricity rates for consumers and businesses. And finally, the impact that will potentially have on electric reliability, which is so key given how many of our critical functions are reliant on near perfect grid. In terms of the outcomes, there were a few main takeaways. One of the messages was good data and transparency is important. It was noted that there may be some misinformation out there, and it's really important to base these discussions in the facts. I've already said it, the scale of the problem is immense. Fortunately, the utilities do have capital investment plans, and Dominion, for instance, is planning to invest close to $65 billion in the next 5 years, particularly on transmission, high voltage transmission, solar and battery storage, natural gas, and interestingly, no coal is in their plan, which is good for climate work. The other piece of the outcome was the investments will tend to put upward pressures on electric rates. And this is happening on top of existing pressures from historical underinvestment in grid resources. So there's a lot of policy work and even, as you've heard in the last week, some corporate commitments and pledges to help figure this out. And finally, there was some discussion of some level of enhanced communication, particularly between the utilities and the data center managers and operators and localities as well, could help address what is perceived as canary in the coal mine, where these massive large loads do have the sophisticated ability to rapidly disconnect from the grid in ways that could cause grid instability. So there are some concerted efforts to continue to look at these issues. So with that, I'll turn it over to Steve, who will brief you on the water.
All right. Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Steve Bieber, COG's Water Resources Director. Going to give you some quick highlights of what we took away from the March 2nd forum that was focused on water. For water, the main message from the forum is that risk is driven by peak demand and cumulative impacts, not average use. Data center water demand varies widely depending on the cooling technology they use, the IT load, the season, and those details oftentimes are unknown early in the planning process. So water utilities tend to find out later on, which can make planning a challenge. But what really stresses the water system are short duration, high demand periods, typically during hot, dry conditions, when other regional water demands tend to be high, so middle of the summer. This is also why we frame this as a regional issue, because our water resources, the Potomac River, it's a shared region-wide resource, and other sources like the Patuxent River, the Occoquan Reservoir, the groundwater we use in the region are also shared resources. And individual projects on their own might look like they're manageable, but combined impacts can create regional risk. And it's not just water supply. Large data center sites can also affect wastewater characteristics, stormwater runoff, and that requires coordination across utilities and local government. So a question becomes, what does this mean for decision makers? We can get the next slide, please. Thank you. So for elected officials, this is about balancing real economic and AI-driven benefits with energy, water, land use, and community priorities. One consistent theme we heard is that past is not prologue. Data center size, the technology, operating profiles are all changing very quickly. So traditional assumptions or what may have been developed in the past doesn't always hold for what's going to happen in the future. Regional coordination is essential. Water, energy, land use decisions in one jurisdiction directly affect others, particularly for reliability and ratepayer affordability. And those are both paramount issues. And I'm sure this is not a surprise, but across the country, state and local governments are also refining their policies. So sharing best practices like we do here at COG helps keep our region ahead of others. And finally, better transparency and information sharing, especially around peak demand, can really help planning, public trust, and the outcomes we see at the end. And AI itself can actually be a part of the solution. So while it's a challenge driving a lot of the data center development, it can also help identify solutions. And I think across both forums we've held so far, a consistent message was early coordination, better information, and regional thinking are all important. So I'm going to turn it over to Sakina. She's going to talk about the forum we have upcoming on land use.
Thank you. That's a great segue to the next forum, the land use and economics of data centers, where we look to bring together the public sector and industry. We're looking at late April, early May to do this. So, what are we trying to get out of this? What are our objectives? I think, as we all know, data centers are not new to this region, but the recent growth and diversification of data center development is prompting changes in your land use planning and economic and policy frameworks that we will examine. We'll also look to discuss key issues and trade-offs such as infrastructure demands and affordability, not just in terms of utilities, but also for the ability of other land uses to locate or remain viable. And lastly, we'll explore best and promising practices, as well as regional coordination and shared solutions across the region and with industry. Next slide, please. So to drill down a bit on what we're proposing in terms of the forum topics, we're really looking at two main categories of discussion, one around managing growth and the other one around economic considerations. So under managing growth, land use and community priorities, which I know is close to everyone's heart here. One of the questions that we might consider is how are you balancing the needs of data centers as industrial uses with other uses and priorities such as housing, and how are you making these decisions? In terms of facilities, what do we need to know about facilities and their siting needs now and also in the future? For example, you're seeing more mega data centers. Are there opportunities for them to be more energy efficient, use green infrastructure, and also incorporate design solutions that can not just mitigate the impacts of data centers, but also benefit your communities? Approval processes. How are you approaching zoning and permitting? And what can we learn in terms of the types of community benefits that you are negotiating or would like to negotiate? What does public engagement look like, and how are you framing that discussion? Economic considerations, which is top of mind for quite a few folks here. We'll examine the various taxation frameworks across the region, including tax incentives and exemptions, as well as conditions under consideration, such as environmental requirements. We'll also look at revenue generation. How significant is this? What are the other benefits, such as employment? And how are the costs associated with data centers being allocated? Lastly, how do data centers fit within your economic development strategy? Data centers are clearly a major driver of our local and regional economies. And at the same time, you might be looking to balance this growth with growth in other sectors and industries. So lots of questions that I just threw out there. We don't need to answer them now, but looking forward to discussing this and engaging with you all at this upcoming forum. So thank you, and we'll be following up on the event details and dates.
So I'm sure we have a few questions. I know I have a couple. And it's interesting, it's rare whenever my daughter, who's 20 years old, questions any of my decisions. But out of the blue, she came home and she was like, what in the world are you guys talking about data centers for in our community? I took the privilege a week ago to meet with a group that was created called Anti-Data Centers in Charles County. Young activists. I thought, okay, I can handle this because, my position was the county has not made a decision. We're only looking at the zoning for data centers. But I could tell you I was educated by these young activists because of the level of knowledge that they brought to the table. And so for me, it drives home the importance of this endeavor by COG for local elected officials to learn more about this very important issue. So the question I had was, what is a hyperscale data center? Because they use that term, and is that the same as you use the term mega data centers? Is that the same thing?
My sense is it's referring to the same thing. And my understanding of the hyperscale is, when you think of the megawatt capacity, they started out 1 to 20 megawatts, then you're starting to see 20 to 50 megawatts. Now you're talking 100 to 300 megawatts. So those hyperscalers are the ones that have incredible capacity for energy demand. And there's even talk of some of these data centers getting as big as like a gigawatt.
And just to add to that, I think you know, it's not just a question about the intensity of the, you know, or productivity in terms of megawatts, but also the footprint. And that's, you know, when we talk about land use, the data centers can also refer to larger footprints. And that's what we're also starting to see in the region.
And for anyone, if you had questions, could you turn up your, thank you. Let Mayor Gaskins go first, then Mr. Allen, and then we'll go around the room.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. On an earlier slide, you mentioned that Dominion, Pepco, and PJM have plans related to keeping the grid working properly and reliable. I'm just curious, who evaluates those plans and how often do they have to be updated?
Good question. And much of that is evolving as we speak. The PJM has a number of initiatives and, you know, there's a bunch of new initiatives related to all sorts of aspects of that. The organization that has, there's a couple organizations that have jurisdiction over that. One is obviously the FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, can handle setting a lot of the PJM level policies. And for those who hopefully folks know, PJM is our grid. It runs from Chicago all the way to New Jersey and Pennsylvania down into Virginia. So the largest machine in the world, I've heard. The other one is the National Electric Reliability Council. And in terms of the timing, it's almost as if it's continual. You know, NERC is always paying attention to these. They investigate any. You know, there was an event a few years back where there was a small glitch in the voltage caused by a substation down in Charles County that rippled all the way up through DC, and NERC deployed staff to figure out what caused it and take steps to do the engineering work to redesign it. So there's like I said, it's kind of an ongoing thing and you know, you should keep in mind the PJM and the utilities you know, they actually have a responsibility to keep the grid reliable. So it's not a nice to have, they must do.
Thanks. I likewise appreciate the presentation and the work going into the panels. One comment, then a question. For all of us here, for folks that may not be aware, there is a group called the PJM Legislators Collaborative, which is a group of elected leaders across the whole region that have been working to try to help outline the types of things we want to see PJM do to help address both the growth of data centers, but also how we manage that for our constituents and how this impacts affordability for residents, for local businesses, and for government itself. In the District of Columbia, I am not going to see a data center built on my horizon, but I am going to see a data center show up in my power bill. So every month when I open up my envelope, I am seeing costs that are borne to the district. And I know when we had this conversation a month ago, part of what I had asked for is that this conversation also include part of COG's effort to focus on affordability. And that can be affordability for the resident, for the business, and again, all of our jurisdictions also carry a cost. I don't have an ability, when you talk about the economic factors, the district is not going to be able to create, for example, any type of new revenue scheme for data center creation. That's going to be my colleagues and partners outside the district. But again, the impact, because our PJM system has not been bringing on enough new energy generation fast enough. So we have a relatively static supply of energy generation and then these huge demands. And there's a big effort around trying to say these data centers have to start bringing their own energy sources. They have to do a lot more instead of jumping the line. But from your standpoint, how are you using this, or is it the next forum, or is there a fourth forum to be able to focus on affordability? Because I think all of us are going to be hearing, if you're not already, from our constituents about rising power bills and the role that data centers do play in it. Not the only role in that rising rates, but it is a role. I was kind of curious if you can talk about what the plan is for how to address the conversation around affordability here.
I mean, that'll be part of the final forum, and we're waiting, frankly, for the legislative sessions, the third and final session. We'll talk about the economics, both what are the tax schemes in both states and in terms of local and state taxes, what do we see at local revenues and impact to ratepayers. And these forums are not we've had an all-star group of folks come, leaders at PJM, leaders at FERC, former state corporation commissioner, judges in the Commonwealth, and Mayor Gaskins, to your point, Dominion every 5 years has to submit, here's our plan of how we'll generate energy, what the need's going to be, and here's the different types of energy that we're using to meet this demand. It has to be approved by the State Corporation Commission. So it's a twice a decade plan that they put out. But these are not pro or anti data center forums. These are opportunities to share the facts and talk about that. I mean, there are two sides to what is driving folks' electrical bills. A lot of it's usage, and a lot of the companies that we're growing, including in the district, are predicated on having data centers. A lot of the IT and health and fintech and cybersecurity and big data. And if you look at kind of Governor Moore and Governor Spanberger and Mayor Bowser's growth strategies, that Venn diagram, all of them are predicated on having high-speed data centers. So there's a discussion, and there is, what part of that bill is due to data centers versus what part of that bill is due to increased usage of everyone's usage of these devices. And that's trying to schedule these in a way that brings the right people to the table to have a level-headed conversation about that. But that is part of the third forum, both what are the local economics, but also the impact to ratepayers.
Yeah, I guess I want to be clear. I'm not saying let's go stick our head in the sand and
sure.
just say anti-data center. What I'm talking about is there is an impact on affordability, and I did not hear it articulated as explicitly in the third forum around the affordability and the impacts on ratepayers. I would want that third forum to be a little more explicit about having affordability be part of that conversation. And that's not are we going to have a data center or not? Kind of already crossed that river. It's more about what's the affordability impacts for ratepayers and for all of us that have to balance a budget municipally. Our energy costs are a huge driver as well for our local budgets as well. Thank you.
So I really don't know who put their name up first. Okay, so I'm gonna start from left to right with Ms. Oriatha, and then we'll just go from left to right.
Thank you. And thank you for your presentation. My question's similar to yours. Every jurisdiction is having this conversation. Some jurisdictions might land where we don't want it in our backyard, but we know there's still going to be an impact. And then there's jurisdictions that are trying to find this balance that if it lands, then how do you make the community benefits work? And so I'm also trying to understand, are you guys also analyzing best practices? Because largely we want, obviously, for them to pay their own way, to look at how we put guardrails on them paying for their own energy costs. But until that happens, I know some jurisdictions are also looking at part of the revenue going to subsidize the increases for that jurisdiction to pay for utility costs. So I'm just curious if you're going to also map out those options so that jurisdictions where they might land on its coming can also still understand that affordability and it can be built into like community benefits agreements.
Hi. Thank you for that comment. And yes, we will be looking at best practices, emerging practices. It's a fast-moving field, and there are likely promising practices, not just from this region, but also nationally. And as part of the forum, as Clark mentioned, we're hoping to bring in experts, as we did with the prior two forums, who can speak to the pertinent and the key issues, and that includes experts from industry and others. So that we should be looking at that. Yes.
And this is more of a comment than maybe an answer, but two things. One is we heard pretty consistently over and over at the Water Forum the phrase growth pays for growth. So I think rate setting for water and for electricity is a little different. A lot of times too, the water utility is locally owned, like a local government or a quasi-government agency. And if you're coming in to connect, whether you're a data center or something else, you're paying the freight to put in the infrastructure to connect to the water system. So there were pretty consistent answers around that. To not put it on the ratepayer, you're putting it on the entity that's requesting the service. The other thing is, just as an FYI, the Water Research Foundation is starting a project this year to look at some of the questions you're talking about around affordability and how it affects the water sector. COG is on the advisory panel for that, so maybe by the end of the year, there could be some interesting results to report back from that.
Just to follow up to that, as you're looking, is also looking at maybe where we went wrong, because there are some, I don't know if you want to call them tax breaks or incentives that different jurisdictions gave, some of them on what they were paying for utilities, which they're going to get their money, right? So then it went to the consumers. And so to your point, maybe it's set up in a way that they should have front paid the burden of that, but as an incentive, there was an unintended consequence. So I think understanding and doing analysis of like where we know what went wrong would be helpful, because I think there's an assumption that they're paying that, but then that could have been an incentive that was given. And to your point earlier, it's the entire grid. It's not going to be just that local jurisdiction.
Thank you. I have actually two questions. The first is just a logistical one, which is how proximate, how close to a high tension line do data centers need to be viable and supportive? That is to say, how far will they, does it make sense for them to build new infrastructure on the wire side to get their juice, as opposed to being proximate to existing high tension lines?
We didn't get into the specifics on that, but having recently toured Data Center Alley in Loudoun County, I could say that in general, you're needing transmission and substations pretty much at the facility.
Mm-hmm.
Having said that, there is a general inability to connect to the grid currently. The grid's at capacity, so new data centers coming in many instances, are needing to bring their own power. So there's at least one data center that's brought in something like 7 large natural gas turbines that are running 24/7, and they're putting that entire bill just to bridge the gap between now where they want to operate and the time where they're actually able to connect to the grid.
Interesting. Thank you. And then you had an alarming chart early on about the usage rates, and so how's the timing of the expansion of Calvert Cliffs align with what the demand is in that demand curve? Because I know that Calvert Cliffs is supposed to be doubling its capacity, and I'm not sure what the time frame is on that. And I'm seeing a chart that seems to be accelerating faster than what they can probably fill.
I don't know the answer to the question. I do know that Dominion's in particular looking at, I know that Dominion's looking at North Anna and expanding the capacity there. In general, again, the capital investment plans I've seen for the next 5 years focus on transmission and getting the grid power to where it needs to be. So something like 20% of their capital investment is going to be on T&D, and then another 18 or so on natural gas, and then something like 13 on solar with battery storage. But I'll look into the Calvert Cliffs issue.
Thank you.
In general, I think the nuclear side is probably on a slightly slower path.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, my name is Rodney Lusk. I'm the supervisor in Franconia District in Fairfax County. We actually have a data center that AWS is building in the Springfield area of my district. Luckily, it's in an industrial area. So in terms of the siting of it and the concern from the community, there weren't as many. But to the point that you were making earlier, Sakina, dovetailing on the siting is really important, and thinking about how we can have maybe a mix of uses around some of these facilities, because I'll be honest, they're not very attractive, right? So the difficulty here is they tend to be large boxes. They just don't have, how do I say this delicately, a lot of appeal to them when you're looking at those large boxes. So the question is, for the community, we've got to figure out how we can help them see that these are beneficial in those areas that might not just be industrially zoned. So trying to make them more inclusive of other parts of our communities is what we've got to try to figure out. So I think some of the work that you will be, as attending to and helping us with is looking at how we can do co-located facilities, meaning uses in one location, not just the data center, and then thinking about the aesthetics of it and how to make it more appealing so that people are like, I can see this in my community. Because right now, when you talk about putting a data center adjacent to a residential community, it's just outright, absolutely not. We don't want that thing near us. So I know we've got to do a lot more work around that to try to help people see the value. And as an elected official, the value is clearly in the revenue that's generated from these facilities. They are able to help us address some of our, particularly in Virginia, where you're basing most of your tax collection on property tax. It does give us another option as opposed to pushing that on to the residential owners. You're able to have that be spread out across some of those other commercial uses. So I just think this is something that we've got to really figure out. I don't know if you have any thoughts now, but how do we, make these facilities more appealing? How do we address some of those questions and concerns that we're hearing from the community?
I think that those are excellent points and do relate directly to what we will be discussing at the forum. It also reminds me of a study that the district actually did a number of years ago when the district looked at industrial uses in Ward 5, where there are quite a few, and what are some of those approaches that can be taken to kind of mitigate the impacts, but also do it in a way that can even benefit. So, landscaping, buffering, green design, also co-location, as you mentioned. So I think I mentioned that the landscape is evolving, both in terms of, where these are locating and also the types of new issues and opportunities that those locations might generate, and also related to existing locations. So there can be design solutions and other types of land use approaches. Yeah.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Andrea Bailey, Supervisor in the Potomac District in Prince William County. I really like the question. Hello, dear. Really like the question about community benefits agreements. I think that is something that is an opportunity as we go through these presentations. That's an opportunity for us to explore even more as it relates to what is beneficial for our jurisdictions. So that, please, if you could just invest in that, the research in that. The other thing is best practices that was mentioned. I tell you, for those of us who have the data centers that are old and or new in our districts, we can learn a lot from those who have gone before us. And so I certainly have in an environment where the residents are saying, no, 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 but there is a benefit to it. And so I would invite you to have those conversations here at the dais so that you can learn more as well as we go through the presentations. The other thing that I wanted to ask is this going to be something that we can download and present as you are presenting? And I say that because it's fresh, it's new, it's on the precipice, but can we download it and use it in our jurisdictions if others cannot attend?
Yes, so both forums that we had were sold out or at capacity. A couple of our board members attended, but most of your staffs were there. So, and they're all live streamed and recorded. So on the COG site, and we will make sure when we schedule the May one that it's at a central location with sufficient capacity. But both the water and the electricity forum, and a lot of these questions that are asking that are specific. I mean, to be clear, we've got some subject matter expertise on staff, but we're pulling in a lot of folks to these meetings that can help answer some of these questions that you have at the forums themselves, or as due outs after the forum. If we're not able to answer something on a specific project today or aspect, we will make sure we preload that into what we're doing in May.
Thank you, Clark. I really appreciate that because I've talked to Jeff and I've been playing telephone tag and I've talked to him. And so that would be really helpful because some of us cannot attend. But it would be beneficial if we had the subject matter experts to present when we cannot attend. And then the last thing I want to say is something that Rodney just mentioned about the aesthetics of the buildings. That is a growth spurt as we relate to the data centers, that we've gone from being ugly, ugly boxes to maybe a little more beautiful, and the aesthetics being better as we grow into this. So I just wanted to offer that. But thank you so much for this time, what you're doing. It is a good time to do it. And it's a good time for us to learn as it relates to rates and things like that that we don't know, because that's not our subject matter expertise. But it is a good place for us to learn to make sure that we're making the best decisions for the jurisdictions. Thank you.
Good afternoon. So the first time data centers appeared in Loudoun zoning was 23 years ago. So when we say we've been doing this for a long time, we've been doing this for a long time. And if anyone wants to come out to Loudoun County, visit a data center, have a conversation with us, do any of that, we are more than happy to do that. With respect, Mr. Chairman, I would ask, as your young people did all that investigation, what did they use to investigate? Because I got a feeling they probably looked it up on the internet, right? As all of us sit here today, not a single person in here is using any less than 2 pieces of equipment that requires a data center. You're all watching a film. You all got a cell phone. If you got 2 cell phones, that's 3. If you got 4 cell phones, that's 4. Do you have on a smartwatch? Do you have on a ring? Or any of your clothes on your body from Amazon? That's all data center. And so my caution would be to not ever have a conversation of all good and all bad, because there are things that it is a very double-edged sword. Loudoun County has a lot to teach about the mistakes we made, especially around land use 23 years ago. Having said that, they didn't know 23 years ago what data centers were going to be. So I caution anyone about saying it's all bad or all good. 2 questions on money: for every $1 we spend on a data center, we get $26 back in tax. We have the lowest taxes in the entire DMV by far. That includes Clark County and other rural counties, by far. But there are issues with energy, not so much of water anymore, for a lot of reasons that we can go into later. I would also remind us of this. If localities just say no, period, the end, the state and national government are going to come in and say, this is a national safety issue, and we will take over land use and zoning control. What you do not want to do is lose your own land use and zoning control. So then you can't cite them and say where they go and what happens to them. That is the most dangerous things. So discussion about how they go, where they go, land use, we're happy to have those conversations because we made a lot of mistakes. But just the hard no all the time would also be a mistake. Finally, I would say Loudoun County has never given $1 of tax incentive money to build a data center. Not one. Now, the state has with the state and use local tax, but we haven't had to. They want to come, and you do not ever have to give a tax incentive for them to come. You get money. You don't give money to them, ever, ever. But when I came to office 10 years ago, number 1 complaint was traffic. Today, the number 1 complaint is by far about data centers. And so it is a very tough conversation for elected officials to have. However, it's a mistake to say they're all good or all bad, because they are not. It is a very double-edged sword. And I say to young people, everyone doesn't want a data center. On your way out the door, toss your cell phone in the trash. Because that's what a data center is. The little computer you're holding in your hand is a data center. So have all those discussions, but try to have them in the most balanced, honest way as possible. They're not all good. They're not all bad. There's lots of nuances to them. But if you call us, we'll be happy to have a conversation with you. We'll be happy to take you into a data center. We'll be happy to have the land use discussion with you. I have a colleague, Mike Turner, who has written a white paper on data center energy that is probably at this moment the most read thing possibly in the not just the nation but the world. There was no joke, an election in Ireland, and it was a presidential election. One of the candidates in the debate in Ireland quoted Mike Turner's paper, and I was like, oh my God, we're never going to get his head back in the door. But we can send you a copy of that white paper. Data centers do not have to be close to power lines. There's there's way to get power there without them being there close. There's a lot of stuff we can teach you, all the mistakes, all the goods, and we're willing to be really honest about the mistakes that were made when we first did this. So let's have the discussion, but please don't walk into any discussion going, it's all terrible or it's all good, because it's neither one of those things.
Thank you, Chair Randall. So I'm Laura Cicroni. I'm a supervisor with Loudoun County. I agree with what Chair Randall said, but I'm also something new that's come to Loudoun County that I would love more information on is about natural gas turbines. So we do have a data center that is operating off the grid on natural gas turbines, and an independent nonprofit did a study on air quality and how that impacts the air quality around that those natural gas turbines. That wasn't done by a professional group. You know, they did that as a nonprofit. So I would love to see COG, because I know we do look at greenhouse gas emissions, start looking into this, because our administration, our president is pushing for data centers to be off the grid with natural gas turbines. So I'd like to learn more about that, because I think as the grid gets overloaded and as we, find these data centers are waiting for that connection, they might go behind the meter and do their own generation, which are these natural gas turbines. So I'd love to get more information about that. I'm the newest member on the Board of Supervisors, so I'm learning as I go, but that's something that I would love more information so we can inform everybody about what that means. What does behind the meter mean, and what do these natural gas turbines do for our air quality?
Yeah, absolutely. And I see Dave Snyder's here as the chair of our Metropolitan Washington Air Quality Committee. And he, I think, feels the same way, that we need to learn a little bit more about what this looks like. The other thing is the backup generators currently are, untiered or tier 1. They really all should be tier 4 generators. And there's thousands of them. So it's a big issue.
Okay, thank you very much.
I'm going to go very quickly because I'm looking at the time, and when it comes to time management, I'm very mindful of that. So my name is Natalie Fanny Gonzalez. I'm the president of the Montgomery County Council. The only thing that I want to focus on data centers, you touched on it, is about making sure that they're self-sustainable. Google is making that transition already. I just introduced a ZTA at the County Council on land use related to where data centers need to be located in Montgomery County. There is one mega one being built as we speak, and it's in a great location because it's right in the heart of an industrial area. And the ZTA talks about buffers, talks about 4-tier generation and all that. And I did it based on best practices around the Washington, D.C. region. I looked at your county, and I looked at Prince George's, I looked at Frederick, and I said, what is it that I do not want to do? And that's what the ZTA is about. More than happy to share it. It's going to be discussed in front of the council in June after we're done with the budget. I appreciate the county executive, Mark Elrich, who's not here right now, but he worked with us on getting the best practices across the Washington, D.C. region. But that's what the conversation needs to be about: self-sustainability within data centers. That's all I want to learn. Everything else on land use, I got you already. I don't need to talk about that anymore. So that's it. Thank you.
Before Ms. Fitzwater, I want to make sure, because we have to be conscious of time right now. Do we have the option of maybe setting for our next agenda, next meeting, the state of commute?
Definitely gonna move state of commute to next month, but in order to talk about the interceptor.
Right. So if we can, please, I mean, let's try to shut this down no later than like 1:15.
Okay, I'll be really brief because a lot of people have already said some great things. Jessica Fitzwater, Frederick County, there are hyperscale data centers being built in our county right now. I will just say we would also love to be helpful. We are really ahead of the curve in terms of what we have done on siting and zoning and really being pretty restrictive and very specific about siting requirements and where data centers can be built. Ours are also being built on a industrial brownfield site, and our data center overlay, which is our zoning tool we're using in the law, is codified that it cannot be more than 1% of the county's acreage. And our current map that was approved is actually less than that. So we're talking about being extremely restrictive and any future data center development only going in and around this site that is already being developed. What I will say in terms of the forum that would be most helpful, really a land use toolkit is very needed. The challenge for the DMV is that you have 3 jurisdictions that all have different land use authorities and different roles that the states versus the counties versus the municipalities play. But I think anything like that would be very helpful. The second thing that you did have on your slide is talking about messaging and communication. That is probably the hardest thing right now because separating fact from fiction is very difficult in this day and age, and especially around this issue. So tools for counties and municipalities to use to communicate the actual facts on the ground in your jurisdiction versus the higher level conversation, which is rife with misinformation, I think would be good. The other thing is the data center companies themselves are finally figuring out that they need to have like a PR shop and a comm shop and actually talk about the benefits themselves, and we should not be having to carry that water for them. This was a big topic at the NACO legislative conference that just happened, and I think they're finally getting the message. But I would say tools for counties to use in terms of building a comms and messaging plan around this and how to hold companies accountable on that front would also be very helpful. And the last thing I'll say is ditto to everything Chair Randall said. Please do use Loudoun as a resource and do not give them any tax. You do not need to give them any incentives. So I will just double down on that too.
Thank you. Takis Karantonis, Harlingen County. We don't have any hyperscale data centers, obviously, in the center of the region, but we are equally concerned about a couple of things. Number one, the national safety aspect of that is huge, and it's not touched by now. This is a cluster. This is the biggest in the world, so I cannot help but think that this is a target for a lot of mischief. So the second thing that I want to tell you, like Councilmember Allen, we're extremely concerned about the impact not only in the household price, so the prices that our consumers pay, but our businesses, etc. Just the capital pool of these data centers. I mean, if you want to start a small business here and you want to buy like a dozen of computers, right now you're charged almost 40 to 45% more because there is just simply no hardware in the market. This has a lot of impacts. We are a region that's still a service industries based region. This is where most value added is happening, and this is where most employment is. The kind of technology that comes from the industry of the data centers is very concerning to us. We already see a labor market that is extremely viscose and problematic, and this is evolving as we speak. There is an incentive that we all gave to the data centers, and we collectively paid for that, which is, and continue to pay for that, which is all the infrastructure that these data centers are using now at a mega scale. And if you look at what's happening in Texas, in Tennessee, in Louisiana, and also abroad, there is a lot of public investment in infrastructure, and I find this industry to be volatile over time. I was just a few months ago in Abilene, Texas, where NVIDIA was building a colossal system, I mean, bigger than Northern Virginia, and just offering that in chunks of, here's a 2 gigawatt, facility opportunity for Oracle. There is a 5 gigawatt facility opportunity for XAI. And I found that absolutely absurd. They were providing their own energy. in the plant, they were actually and they are pushing not only to cancel the local government's ability to zone that, but they canceled local government altogether because they want to have a district by themselves. To show you what this means also for us, I was having a conversation with the folks from Microsoft just 2 weeks ago. So he was telling me, oh, don't worry about the power prices. There are other things that are moving, like the price of copper and other things. We are going to lower your power prices. We have already, they said, a contract with the 3 Mile Island plant to restart a nuclear reactor just for us. This is the same Microsoft who read Mike Turner's paper in Dublin, in Ireland, where they spend the same money to build a power stabilizing. They equip every data center in Ireland with a power stabilizing battery plant. So this is a completely different approach, and it comes because the government of Ireland was very centered about where the power comes from and who pays for the infrastructure and all the consequences of that. So we have some work to do there on these issues, because I see in the peripheral benefits of that, like, are we going to stand up for renewables, for example, here? Because, you know, we have a president who wants to invest trillions in AI, but has zero, willingness to invest in all the above in terms of power stability and power supply. That's just not okay. And we should have some saying as a region here, because we are the first users and also the first sufferers of that. Thank you. Oh, it goes back.
Thank you.
Oh, it's ours.
Hello?
I see.
Yeah, thanks. The talk about danger giving a public official one microphone, I almost got two. So in any event, just two quick things. As chair of the Metropolitan Washington Air Quality Committee, I share the questions that were asked, and I know we'll focus on best practices with regard to protecting and improving air quality. Secondly, I chair the National Capital Region Emergency Preparedness Council, and I think we have two interests, at least. Number one, that electric power be reliable, because a failure of the grid would be a catastrophe. And secondly, with regard to nuclear and other elements, are our response and planning capabilities up to the job with regard to new generation of power alternatives in the region that we may be seeing? Thanks very much.
I will be very quick, because I several colleagues here already said my comments. So I won't repeat them, but I do think we should take Chair Randall and the Prince William County crew, and Frederick is learning Montgomery County, just the opportunity to take them up on their offer to discuss best practices, so that we don't have to work in silos. So I just wanted to suggest that for a future meeting, to get down to the nitty gritty, because a lot of us have zoning authority. A lot of us are trying to figure this out, and why not just learn from each other quickly? I heard my comments that I was going to raise on solar. I do think I was curious about the federal impact in pulling away from solar incentives, and how that might have an impact on how quickly we can roll out and support data centers. And then the other thing I wanted to just check on is, in your presentation, you talked about water. I'm curious to know if there's any studies on what the impact is on water. Does it evaporate? Does it come back clean? There's a lot of discussion about water and sewage right now, given other things that are going on. I just wanted to see if we have any additional information on that.
Quickly related to the solar issue, we've been working on that for a number of years now. We're aware that the data center companies are kind of almost single-handedly pushing the solar market development in Virginia. You know, they're investing in these utility scale solar arrays. And in fact, there's kind of a disconnect in what they're doing and how we report our emissions, given that the protocols, and there has been some discussion of how we can get into that. But offsite solar and as I said, with the Dominion, they're planning on investing in solar with storage to help solve the problem. And the utility and the data center companies are clearly investing in that as well. So I think on-site solar, not going to work, but off-site solar at the utility scale is definitely something that we're supporting and looking into further.
All right, just real quick on the water thing. I guess I would say it depends. Like I mentioned earlier, the cooling technologies data center uses vary a lot from one to another. Some are air cooled, some are water cooled, some are a mix of both. We're starting to see now a lot of data centers using actually cooling in the rack, which is much more efficient cooling and it uses a lot less water. Our partner organization, the Interstate Commission on the Potomac River Basin, they do modeling every 5 years on water supply for the whole region, what the demand's projected to be going out to 2050, and what the consumptive use looks like. They've been looking at that more and more upstream and in the region, and factoring in their most recent report, which they issued in December, data centers. So we could come back with some more data on that, but there are estimates out there. But the bottom line sort of is it really varies from site to site and even each center.
Real quick, just to follow up on what Jeff said, to explain it in layman's terms, because it's helpful for me, but asking about solar, a lot of these companies that are building the data centers have clean energy requirements for their portfolio. They want to purchase clean energy. So in the Commonwealth of Virginia, between 2015 and 24, there's been a 270-fold increase in solar, and it's moved to fifth nationally with the amount of solar installed. Over 40% of all new solar installations that are in the state are there because of power purchase agreements with data centers. They're not co-located at the same site in Loudoun County, but they're in Orange County, they're in Spotsylvania County, they're in other parts of the state. So when we do our emissions report for the region, one of the conversations we're having with the data center industry is we need a little bit more intel on what those power purchase agreements entail so we can tell a fuller picture. Because a lot of those are proprietary information, it's not public, so we don't know that because there's a data center in Prince William County, there's a 1,500-acre solar farm in X county. And you can redact company information, sometimes you redact localities, but it helps us tell a fuller picture when we do our emissions report. So,
Well, I want to thank you for this presentation. I mean, needless to say, this is a very important issue. As a result, though, we will omit agenda item number 9 from today's agenda. That will be on the April agenda. But right now, and unfortunately, this particular issue, I think, warrants just as much time as this discussion, but it is an update on the regional coordination in response to the Potomac Interceptor pipeline collapse. Mr. Bieber, the COG Water Resource Program Director, will give an update at this time. And it's important because we do have, at the end of today's session, we have an executive session, so we want to try to get through this as best we can. So thank you.
You're welcome. So if we can bring up my slides, it's going to be a pretty high-level overview, about a dozen slides about what happened, how we're coordinating regionally, what we're going to be doing next. And I'll move through it at a pretty good pace. Hopefully. Why don't I start talking and we'll get the slides up here in a moment. So I think some of you may know the Potomac Interceptor. It's a federally authorized interstate asset that has been central to regional growth, water quality for decades. It was authorized by Congress back in 1960 and built between 1961 and 63. And it conveys, on average, about 60 million gallons per day of wastewater across DC, Maryland, and Virginia. All of that goes to the Blue Plains Advanced Wastewater Treatment Plant in Washington, D.C., which is one of the largest of its kind in the world. It's owned and operated by DC Water, but it functions as shared regional infrastructure. For the COG region, the significance is really simple. It's been the backbone of a multi-jurisdictional wastewater system here for over 60 years, and it was designed as a high-capacity interstate solution. And that means that when something happens at one point, like the collapse we saw here back in January, it has consequences that span jurisdictions and pretty quickly. It's also important to note that this is exactly the type of infrastructure where federal, state, and local interests overlap, because Congress helped to create it as a regional solution that crosses multiple states and jurisdictions. All right, I'm going to keep going and we'll get the slides up here in a minute. So just say a real recap of what happened. So on January 19th, 2026, a 72-inch diameter of the interceptor collapsed along the Clara Barton Parkway near the I-495 interchange in Montgomery County, and is within the C&O Canal National Historical Park. The result was a major sewer overflow, as you all know, somewhere between 240 and 300 million gallons of sewage into the C&O Canal and the Potomac River. DC Water's key early containment strategy was temporary bypass pumping. They were able to get that up and activated on January 24th. And what that does essentially is reroute the wastewater around the failed section of the pipe and limit additional discharges out into the environment. This all happened, I'll note, under very adverse winter conditions. It was extremely cold. We had a major snowstorm then. So, frankly, I think pretty amazing what they did in a short period of time. And thank you for getting that up. If we can jump up to slide 4. Awesome. Okay. So where are we now? The response has moved from the emergency containment into repair and completion, and then environmental rehabilitation. The work sequence is essentially installing the bypass, which is done, as you can see on the slide. Investigation and excavation, so getting all of the stuff out of the way they need to be able to repair the pipe, and then repair and restore flow, and then do the environmental rehabilitation, some of which has started already. As of today, DC Water reports measurable progress, including no additional flows entering the Potomac since February 8th. They're also preparing to return flow in the coming days to the Potomac interceptor and meet their mid-March target to complete the emergency repair on the damaged part of the pipe. Crews have also completed work to reinforce pipe sections upstream and downstream of where the collapse happened. They use what's called geopolymer to strengthen the pipe, so it's like concrete, but you can spray it onto the pipe. Today, they were scheduled to do a CCTV camera inspection just to make sure that where they're planning to restore flow is okay to do so. And when that emergency compare is completed, the full flow and function of the interceptor will be restored, and what is known as open channel flow. So they're going to leave the part that collapsed open, but all the wastewater will be contained in the pipe. So it'll continue to flow through the open pipe sections contained within the trenches while long-term rehabilitation work takes place. Until that happens, probably next week, the bypass pumping operation will continue to divert flow around the collapsed site and then back into the interceptor. And the bypass will be carefully deactivated as the flow returns to the pipe, hopefully next week. Next slide, please. So these are just some pictures to give you a sense of what's going on. I won't spend a lot of time on it, but you can just see sort of upstream manhole, kind of where it's surcharged due to the blockage of the pipe, where sewage was running down a canal into the interceptor, what the bypass pumps look like, and what the channel looks like to get the flow back into the Potomac interceptor. Next slide, please. Great. So regarding water quality, elevated E. coli bacteria levels really drove the recreational advisories early on. Importantly, drinking water supplies remain safe because the regional intakes we use on the Potomac are all located upstream of the failure. Since the bypass activation has been put into place, one additional overflow did happen, and bacteria levels have declined though since that ceased, and advisories have been lifted or narrowed as conditions allow. But monitoring continues at an expanded set of locations. You can see them all there on the map. And you can see how this has been managed regionally. So DC, Maryland, Virginia, all doing sampling. coordinated efforts to align monitoring and communications across multiple partners. COG has been active in helping to coordinate monitoring and communications in particular. We will also be carrying out, just so you're aware, independent microbial risk assessment with a professor, Dr. Carrie Hamilton from Arizona State University, and some synoptic nutrient surveys of sediment nutrients along the Potomac with a research team from the University of Maryland. All of that data will be collected and used to help support near-term public health and water quality decision-making as the pipe gets fixed and, answer questions about that. Next slide, please. Great. So just to give some context about the spill volume, flow, and all of that, just wanted to say that the incident relative to give some data on incident relative to typical Potomac flows and nutrient loads. So in terms of water quantity, the spill volume is significant locally, but small relative to the flow of the Potomac River. Here, as you can see, was about 90 minutes of recent river flow, like the conditions we see right now. But the environmental significance, it's less about the gallons and more about the concentration. So when you have raw sewage going into the water, nitrogen and phosphorus concentrations are pretty high. So the takeaway is nutrient load is about half a day of what the load is coming over the fall line. But a brief intense pulse, like what you see with a sewage discharge, can cause short-term impacts even when it's diluted. Next slide, please. So now why this matters to the COG board and to the region, the Potomac is a multi-state watershed. You can see that on the map. The interceptor is shared regional infrastructure. Repair and rehabilitation costs are covered under the Blue Plains IMA. So that's a regional agreement that's been in place since 1985. And cost allocation mechanisms in that agreement and the structure of it is part of why this system has worked so well for decades. So it's been really successful in that regard. The justification for federal funding and support is also pretty straightforward. Because this is an interstate federally authorized asset, federal participation is consistent with the origins and the regional nature of the system and can help mitigate long-term ratepayer exposure across all the jurisdictions it serves. Next slide, please. So an important COG role throughout this event has been messaging and coordination. The slide you see here just has some example messages you can see that have gone out. COG has hosted a number of regional calls with PIOs around the region to align key messages, including reiterating that the drinking water is safe. I think that's been an important key message. And after the second spill happened a while ago, also getting out messages related to wipes, clogging pipes, and amplifying the do not flush wipes message. That aligns with partner messaging you've been receiving. So just one example, WSSC Waters messaging not only about drinking water, but they have a whole campaign on both Can the Grease and Keeps Wipes Out of the Pipe and have been amplifying that. Next slide, please. So on cost, the near-term emergency work is important, but the long-term challenge is really going to be the rehabilitation program for the Potomac Interceptor. You can see some figures on the slide. About $30 million is estimated for the emergency response and repair. About $390 million for near-term capital projects, which would be possibly over the next 5 years, and about $600 million over the longer term, about 10 years. This all frames why this is a sustained infrastructure investment issue, not just an emergency response issue. And again, governance is a key point. The Blue Plains IMA provides cost allocation and is an established mechanism for how costs are shared. Pursuing federal participation and funding is going to help accelerate rehab efforts and reduce the burden on ratepayers, which I think is really important. Next slide, please. So finally, some COG actions, next steps. They fall broadly into 3 buckets. First is monitoring and messaging. So COG, as you all know, serves as a regional convener for information sharing and coordination. We're going to keep the PIO calls going and amplify the messaging around things like wipes and whatnot to put down the pipe. Second, governance. COG, under the IMA, we serve as the secretariat, technical and legal support to all the committees and associated with the Blue Plains IMA, and have supported long-term integrated planning for a major share of the region's wastewater capacity. So about 50% of that goes to Blue Plains. And then last, federal advocacy. So we've been working with regional partners, our congressional delegation, to pursue federal funding strategies for interstate assets like the Interceptor. Just one example, we've been working with DC Water, other partners, to submit a Water Resources Development Act, so WRDA, environmental infrastructure request for $395 million, which would cover the cost of the 5-year rehab for comprehensive like modernization, structural repairs, lining, ventilation, and so forth, justified by risk reduction, avoiding major environmental and economic disruption here in the region. I'll just note, our congressional delegation has been very receptive to that and other requests, and are open to looking at creative ways. You know, an earmark, for example, for hundreds of millions of dollars is not a typical earmark. So they're very open to like brainstorming some ways that we might be able to achieve success on the funding front. It might be through like a supplemental appropriation or something like that. So last slide, which is just my contact info, which you have. I'm not going to put it up on the screen, but if you all access this presentation on the web, or it's going to go out in your board package, there's another slide after this one that's got a bunch of links for more info that you can look up on your own. So I'll stop there. Was that? Oh yeah, for questions, and Clark wants to say a few things.
Just want to thank Steve and his team. Big round of applause for all the work that he's done. To go over this information much more. And it was one of our probably our most well-attended virtual call that we've had in COG's history. So a big thank you to Steve. And a couple items he touched on kind of next steps. One, we'll make sure we share with you through Monica and Steve anything we have shared with the federal delegation, any amplifying of advocating for federal resources, because you saw those numbers. They are costly over the next several years, and absent federal help, that goes to the folks that are part of the IMA and pay for those costs, and they are significant. And two, the public messaging, we are really starting to dig in with the team and taking this opportunity to look at what do we normally do on our public messaging campaigns for protecting our pipes? What are the universes of individuals that we need to really talk to? And are we being smart in a way that we're really targeting those folks? So who is it that is flushing wipes, right? Do we have good data on, is it what subsets of the population? Are there more direct ways we can get at them? And kind of a little bit of a third party look at, is our public messaging as effective as it can be? And certainly we have some new images and some new numbers, I think, to really get people's attention and connect individuals to, hey, if we do not solve this and there's another break, it's going to result in additional monies coming from our localities, and everyone's going to have to pay for it. I think there's some jarring images in that slide deck that might get people's attention a little bit more. So kind of public messages we're really leaning into, working with Steve and the PIOs, and then the federal support. We will share with you what we have sent, but amplifying that to the congressional delegation would be really helpful.
Perfect. Councilman Allen.
Thank you. So at our COG meeting a month ago, I walked in straight from visiting the spill site with my boots still on. I asked COG, because it seemed like the only place that would really, I know it smelled a little bad, but I tried to rinse them off beforehand.
I tried.
Tried. But what was immediately stark was that this regional table is the only place where we could bring together all the right players to help with communication. And so Clark, Steve, to the whole team, like, thank you. You guys moved really fast to help pull some of those things together. And I think right after COG started pulling that together, I saw a much more kind of front foot stance from DC Water and from others. And I frankly don't think some of that would have happened without COG helping take that action. So thank you for being so responsive, helping be the convener that only COG can be for that. And then all of our respective jurisdictions are able to play in. I definitely agree with the messaging on wipes, like just come on, people. But this was not caused by wipes. There's something very different. And the remediation, the environmental remediation here is going to be very lengthy. It's not a matter of weeks. it is going to be months and months and months. I think that is a space where COG can continue to really help push, because so far they have not told anybody where they're taking the materials being removed. DC Water is not sharing that information. They've not put out a full environmental remediation plan so that people can have comments and feedback on that. There's some of the work that has started, but it's not a plan. And if people saw the report that just came out last night from the Potomac Riverkeeper, they have now been able to test the tributary that runs underneath the C&O Canal, where 1.5 billion gallons raw sewage and wastewater has been pumped into an open air diversion that is now leaking down into the culvert underneath in the tributary. They're now seeing very significant E. coli readings from there that's continuing to go into the Potomac. So the remediation is going to take a very long time. I think that's a really ripe space for COG to help keep this together, because it's Maryland, it's DC, it's Virginia. All of us have a stake in the Potomac River. So while the break may have taken place in Maryland, we all have a really big stake in this. And I think that COG can continue to play a big role in making sure there is a appropriate, public, engaged remediation plan that's going to also take some serious money. So I appreciate the work so far, and definitely just kind of a heads up to colleagues, like we still have a lot of work to do.
Yep, I'll say 3 things about that. One is we will dig in and see if we can find more information about what the rehab plan is, because I agree with you. There's been sparse information, at least online, as to what's going on, which isn't to say there isn't a plan. It's just been not very transparent, as they have been with other things. And then the other 2 things are the nutrient and sediment data I mentioned we're doing with University of Maryland, I think is going to get right at the question you're asking about rehabilitation and impacts all the way down into the Potomac estuary. The group we're working with has actually been partnering with the Riverkeeper and been doing monitoring for the past 3 years. So we have a really good baseline now, and then we'll be looking forward to see how does the data we're collecting going forward compared to the baseline they've had from the last 3 years, which I think is really good that we're going to have that. And then the microbial risk assessment will get at the question we keep hearing a lot in the media and other places about, is it safe to kayak? Is it safe to row? Is it safe to, that's designed to actually look at that and provide tools for decision makers to answer those questions. So we'll be having that available probably within a month or less.
Thanks.
Yes, I just want to thank Councilman Allen for bringing this to COG's attention, because starting our meeting, right, the boots, but because I was viewing it strictly as being a DC issue. But when you brought that to our attention, immediately after that, I started seeing the significance of this as a regional issue of concern, because I started getting calls because of the lack of any type of feedback coming from our jurisdiction. And so, I just want to let you know how much I appreciate the fact that you spearheaded that and COG moved forward, because I thought it was extremely important to put information out there for the general public. So we have a few minutes for questions. So are there any questions at this time?
So I know the microphone is all. Thank you. So Rich Metalino with Montgomery County. I want to bring to everyone's attention and give a shout out to the District of Columbia Office of Energy and the Environment. Department of, right, thank you. So they put up a dashboard that has a lot of information and a lot of testing sites that DC Water is doing, the University of Maryland's doing, the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality, and I had no idea there were so many different testing sites, and those all predate. Many of them predate the spill. So it's a tremendous amount of information. It's useful to share with other people that information is out there, because it is pulling together all of these different regional sources in one place. It's a little, it can be, you gotta actually click on a lot of the information, because some of it is daily from DC Water testing. and some of it is weekly or longer testing by the river keepers. So the colors, you might sit there and go, wait a second, why is that color downriver different? It might be old data, but it's a very useful source of information. So thank you to DC for doing that to keep the region informed. So
Yeah.
yes, there has been an open sewer running through Potomac and Bethesda for the last several weeks, which is in going with celebrating the 250th anniversary of the country, because there was an open sewer that ran through the District of Columbia for many decades.
Yeah.
So it is a reenactment of our early part of the Republic, but we are looking forward to that continued contribution. Yes.
Yeah, so
Bailey.
two real quick things about that. You'll see links, as I mentioned, in the PowerPoint that you'll all have access to. It has the DOE dashboard there. It also has resources COG's put together, including a map that you saw in my PowerPoint of monitoring stations. There's been a monitoring group meeting pretty frequently, led by Maryland Department of the Environment, but all of the organizations you mentioned are part of it, to try to make sure it's coordinated and that the information is getting shared. So that's ongoing.
So if there aren't, Ms. Bailey.
Yes, thank you. My question is, please tell me what kind of direct impact does the river keepers have in resolving this problem? I know it's something, but if you could just help us with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, to me, it probably falls in a couple of areas. One is, like I mentioned, they've been out on the river monitoring all the time before this ever happened, and they're continuing to monitor. So I think it's one more good set of data. They're also good eyes on the river for where there are problems. So we've had instances in the past where you might find an issue that nobody was aware of just because they're out on the river and they go, hey, did you see this? And then I think the third is advocacy, because you've heard about the cost, the hope to get federal money to accelerate some of the rehabilitation for the PI. And I think the river keeper is going to be an important ally in helping to advocate for that. So it's, we're running as good as possible, as quickly as possible.
Thank you.
Well, the last item on the agenda today is to move into closed executive session for the purpose of discussing a personnel matter. I want to let the general public know that this is a closed session. Everyone other than COG board members and selected COG staff are required to leave the room and virtual platform. Executive sessions are closed to the public, and the YouTube live stream of the meeting will be turned off at this time. If you're not a COG board member, please gather your belongings and leave the meeting now. So at this time, I'd like to move for